Welcome to the Belly Button Window channel and episode 46, part 2 of the Jimi Hendrix story, like you've never heard it before. In this episode, we will document Jimi's last jam at Ronnie Scott's jazz club and the final days leading to Hendrix's untimely demise, including an exploration of the various facts and theories surrounding his death, plus new revelations from inside sources. Please remember to check the channel's community tab and video information page, where you will find links to related videos, performances, and stunning photographs from the period. Tuesday, the 8th of September. Kirsten Neffer returns to visit Jimi, but the couple's attention is focused on Billy Cox, whose deteriorating condition has resulted in a breakdown. He's sent back to Nashville to recover, and the rest of the tour is cancelled. Thursday, the 10th of September. Jimi attends a party at the Park Lane Hotel for his old friend, Mike Nesmith. Friday, the 11th of September, Jimi participates in his last interview, conducted by Keith Altham, at the Cumberland Hotel, London, for the Record Mirror newspaper, later published October 10, 1970, where he confirms Billy Cox has split back to Nashville. Meanwhile, the search for a stand-in bassist begins. Noel Redding is messaged, but there's no answer. Later, Hendrix has dinner at Ginger Baker's house. Saturday, the 12th of September, Jimi and Kirsten Neffer attend the screening of Antonioni's film, The Red Desert, in London's West End. Sunday, the 13th of September, Jimi and Kirsten argue after an enraged Devon Wilson has a heated conversation with Jimi on the phone. She then promptly turns up in London, while Kirsten, who is filming with James Bond actor George Lazenby, refuses Hendrix's request to quit, resulting in her leaving, never to see him again. Monday, the 14th of September. Following Kirsten Neffer's departure, Jimi starts seeing Monica Danneman and meets up with his other girlfriend Devon Wilson, along with record producer Alan Douglas. Hendrix spent most of the early afternoon and evening discussing his career plans with Douglas, and then in the early morning hours of September 15th, he accompanies him to London's Heathrow Airport. Hendrix's confidant Sharon Lawrence was in London also, and spoke with him that day. Lawrence commented, "Jimi tracked me down, detailing his pressures and discussing the so-called friends. He was jittery and angry." She goes on to say that Hendrix told her, "I can't sleep, I can't focus to write any songs." Later that afternoon, Danneman arrived at the Cumberland. She and Hendrix then drove to her apartment. A former ice skating teacher, who he'd met in January 1969, when the Experience played Dusseldorf, Danneman was staying in a basement apartment at the Samarkand Hotel on Ladebroke Grove. Tuesday, the 15th of September. Over the course of the day, Jimi talks to Chaz Chandler about resuming their business relationship after his contract with Jeffrey expires in December. Later, Jimi meets with Linda Keith at the Speakeasy and gives her a Stratocaster in return for Keith Richards' guitar, which she had loaned to Hendrix in New York back in 1966. Jimi then goes to see Eric Burdon and War at Ronnie Scott's London. They decline his offer to jam with them because of the state he is in. Wednesday, the 16th of September, Jimi attends a party for Judy Wong's birthday being held at Elverston Place. Later, Hendrix returns to Ronnie Scott's to see Eric Burdon with his new band, War, joining the band to play a scorching West Montgomery-style guitar on Mother Earth and Tobacco Road. Afterwards, he returns with Monica to the Samarkand. Doug Bell and Joel J. Brattin, in a piece from Jim Press magazine, unravel the details surrounding Jimi's last time on stage in the early hours of September 17th. Bill Baker was 20 years old in 1970 and had recently become a big fan of Eric Burdon and War. He tells the story of how he came to attend and record the show that night at Ronnie Scott's jazz club. During the set, the girl I was sitting with said, "Look, Jimi Hendrix and Eric's wife." I didn't see him enter, but Hendrix had appeared and I saw him sit with Angie Burdon at a table to the left of the stage. Jimi had his guitar with him. You can hear Eric invite Jimi up onto the stage for Mother Earth. He got up and played on the song with the band using his white Strat. Near the end of that song, Hendrix left the stage to go back and sit with his girlfriend. Burdon asked him to come back, which is also on the tape. He did rejoin the band for the end of the song and also played on Tobacco Road. The tape side ran out shortly after this song started, but I flipped it over and re-recorded over the start of the first set on side 1. After the show was over, Hendrix hung around for a bit and I went over to talk with him. He was sitting there with a pint in front of him, but white wine rather than beer. He offered some to me, and I accepted. so we spilled the wine together on that night. He was polite and friendly, and happy to chat. I asked if I could record the conversation, but he said that probably wasn't a good idea, so we just talked. I borrowed a pen and asked if he would sign the sleeve that I had with me for water sign. He said sure, but take the record out so it doesn't fuck up the grooves. I had an apple, and he asked if he could have a bite, and I said sure, so he took one. In fact, I think he kept the apple and finished it. Finally, Jimmy got up to leave with his girlfriend and said to me, "Hope to see you soon, man." I left the club in the early morning hours and took a cab back home. I remember that there was a US photographer at the show, from New York City if I recall correctly. He took pictures throughout the evening. I have no idea what became of him or of the photographs. Although the details of Hendrix's last day and death are unclear and widely disputed, he had spent much of September 17th in London with Monica Dannemann at her Samarkand hotel apartment. By around 2 p.m., he was sitting in a garden area outside the apartment enjoying some tea, while Monica took photographs of him holding his favorite Fender Strat, which he affectionately called the Black Beauty. In the opinion of author Tony Brown, Jimmy doesn't look particularly healthy in these photographs. His face seems a little puffy, and on only a few of the pictures does he attempt to smile. According to Dannemann, by 3 p.m. they had left the apartment to do some shopping, and in the course of doing so, bump into, amongst others, Kathy Etchingham, who declines his offer to meet later that night, and Devon Wilson, who invites him to a party at Peter Cameron's later that evening. While stuck in traffic, they meet Philip Harvey, who invites Dannemann and Hendrix to tea, which they accepted. After stopping at the Cumberland, Hendrix and Dannemann accompanied Harvey to his apartment, arriving around 5:30 p.m., where they smoked hashish and drank tea and wine with Harvey and two of his female companions, while discussing their individual careers. Sometime around 10 p.m., Dannemann, apparently feeling left out of the conversation and jealous of the attention Hendrix was giving Harvey's female friends, became visibly upset and stormed out of the flat. According to Harvey, Jimmy and Monica argue. Then, after apologizing for the scene, at around 10:40 p.m., they returned to the Samarkand. Dannemann said she then prepared a meal for them at her apartment around 11 p.m., and they shared a bottle of wine together. Sometime after returning to the apartment, Jimmy took a bath, then wrote a poem titled The Story of Life. At approximately 1:45 a.m. on September 18th, Dannemann then drove Hendrix to the party being held by acquaintance and business associate Peter Cameron. Others in attendance included Alan and Stella Douglas, Devon Wilson, Angie Burdon, Mike Nesmith, David Salomon, Beat Kleiner, and others. At the party, Hendrix complained to Cameron about business problems, ate some food, and took a Black Beauty amphetamine tablet. Approximately 30 minutes later, Dannemann rang the flat's intercom asking for Jimmy, causing Stella Douglas to ask that she return later. According to Angie Burdon, when Dannemann came back around 15 minutes later, Douglas used an assertive approach with her to the point of being impolite. Undeterred, Monica demanded to speak with Hendrix. Burdon recalled, Jimmy got angry because Dannemann wouldn't leave him alone. Other guests at the party shouted out the windows at Dannemann asking her to leave. Hendrix eventually yielded and spoke with Monica before unexpectedly leaving the party around 3 a.m. Dannemann, the only eyewitness to Hendrix's final hours, said that sometime after 3 a.m., she prepared 2 tuna fish sandwiches for them. Around 4 a.m., Hendrix, struggling with insomnia after having consumed amphetamines hours earlier, asked her for sleeping tablets. She later said she refused his request, hoping he would fall asleep naturally. Dannemann said she surreptitiously took a sleeping tablet sometime around 6 a.m., with Hendrix still awake, and awoke sometime between 10 and 10:20 a.m. to find him sleeping normally. She said she then left to purchase cigarettes, and when she returned around 11 a.m., found him breathing, although unconscious and unresponsive. When ambulance crew members Red Jones and John Sauer arrived at the Samarkand, the door to the flat was wide open, the gas fire was on, the curtains were drawn, and the apartment was dark. The crew called out several times, but after receiving no response, they entered and found Hendrix alone. According to Jones, well, we had to get the police. We only had Hendrix and an empty flat, so John ran up and radioed and got the aspirator. It was horrific. He was covered in vomit. There was tons of it all over the pillow. Black and brown it was. His airway was completely blocked all the way down. We felt his pulse, showed a light in his eyes, but there was no response at all. At 11:30 a.m., Police officers Ian Smith and Tom Keane responded to a call for police assistance from the ambulance control center. Jones commented, "Once the police arrived, which seemed like no time at all, we got him off to hospital as quick as we could." The ambulance crew left the hotel at approximately 11:35 a.m. to take Hendrix to St. Mary Abbott's Hospital, and they arrived at 11:45 a.m. Medical Registrar Dr. Martin Seifert stated, "Jimi was rushed into the resuscitation room. He was put on a monitor, but the ECG trace was flat. I pounded his heart, doing CPR a couple of times, but there was no point. He was dead." According to Seifert, the attempt to resuscitate Hendrix lasted just a few minutes. The surgical registrar, Dr. John Bannister, commented, "He was cold and he was blue. He had all the parameters of someone who had been dead for some time. We worked on him for about half an hour without any response at all." Bannister pronounced Jimi Hendrix dead at 12:45 p.m. on September 18, 1970. He was 27 years old. He later stated, "On admission, he was obviously dead. He had no pulse, no heartbeat, and the attempt to resuscitate him was merely a formality." Jimi Hendrix was not murdered, says Bob Levine, who was the US manager of the late guitarist at the time of his death in 1970. "Despite the allegations that have recently been made, I need to set the record straight once and for all. Jimi died an accidental death, but he definitely wasn't murdered. Not by Michael Jeffrey, his UK manager, and certainly not by anyone connected to him. The whole thing is one giant lie." Levine's statements counter a claim made by Hendrix's former roadie, James "Tappy" Wright, in his 2009 book Rock Roadie, that Jeffrey drunkenly confessed to him in 1971 that he murdered the guitar icon by stuffing his mouth full of pills and then washing them down with bottles of red wine. Tappy wrote that Jeffrey was afraid that Jimi was going to leave him for a new manager, says Levine. He also said that Jeffrey had taken out an insurance policy on Jimi that was worth $2 million and that he wanted to collect on it. Jeffrey would die himself in a plane crash in 1973. All of which is ridiculous, says Levine. I was Jimi's US manager, and Michael Jeffrey was Jimi's UK manager. Michael also oversaw a lot in the US, but he was involved in other business enterprises. Michael wasn't always Jimi's manager. Chaz Chandler, who was in the Animals, was managing and producing Jimi at first. The three of us, in fact myself, Chaz and Michael Jeffrey, all saw Jimi together in 1966 at the Café Wa in New York City then. After a few years, Chaz and Michael had a split, says Levine. They broke up Chandler Jeffrey, and it was decided that Mike was going to run the UK office, and I'd look after things in the US. Tappy Wright worked in the office for Mike Jeffrey. He did a variety of things, among them acting as a roadie for Jimi. He did some roadie work for Ike and Tina Turner too. Regarding Wright's claim that Jeffrey murdered his star client, Levine says it was all cooked up to sell books. I used to talk to Tappy every day, says Levine. I've known him since the early 60s. He told me he was putting together a book about his years in the rock world. That's fine. Everyone has a right to do a book if they can. But he told me, Bob, I need a hook for the book, I need a handle. He needed something that would be a grabber. Well, saying that Jimi was murdered is a grabber. Saying that Jimi was murdered by his manager is an even bigger grabber. But it's certainly not the truth. According to Levine, the night before he died, Hendrix was out on the town in London. He did a bit of clubbing, and then he went back to his hotel to get a few hours of sleep because he had to catch a plane to Germany the next morning. He was with a girl who did give him some sleeping pills. Jimi always had a hard time sleeping, so he'd take pills to make him sleep. He had some wine too, and went to sleep. But when it came time for the wine to come up, he had to vomit. He was literally knocked out by the pills, so he choked on his vomit. Hendrix's body was found in a room at the Samarkand Hotel, west of London, on the 18th of September 1970. Although the room was listed to Monica Dannemann, who died in 1996, Hendrix was alone at the time. There is no record of who called the ambulance crew that discovered the body. People weren't very good at keeping such records at the time, says Levine. The actual death certificate from Scotland Yard read, accidental suffocation. That was signed by the medical examiner. All of which makes Wright's assertions, in Levine's words, pure baloney. He says that he called the retired medical examiner in Australia, who told him that Jimi didn't die accidentally, that it was a result of foul play. Now, come on, that's right out of a Stephen King novel or something. An 80-year-old medical examiner suddenly changes his mind after 40 years and tells some guy who's writing a rock star tell-all something like that. I told Tappy, what are you doing making up this story? So you want to sell books? Why do you have to print such lies? And he said to me, "Well, who's going to challenge me? Everybody's dead. Everyone's gone. Chas Chandler, Michael Jeffrey, Mitch Mitchell, Noel Redding. They're all gone. Nobody can challenge what I write." In Levine's view, Jimi Hendrix died by accident. He was a happy guy looking forward to making music, and Michael Jeffrey didn't have it out for Jimi in any way. I talked to him the day before Jimi died. He had major plans for Jimi. The future was very bright at the time. The whole thing about Michael taking out a life insurance policy and wanting to collect, that's in Tappy's imagination too. Michael signed an insurance policy on Jimi that the record company took out, and Jimi was aware of this. But that's standard. Frank Sinatra was insured by Reprise for millions of dollars. That's how business is done. Record companies take out insurance policies on major artists all the time, but it was nothing ruthless or dastardly on Michael Jeffrey's part. This is Tappy rewriting history. Now retired and living in Florida, Levine says that he's saddened that Wright's story might have found a way into Hendrix folklore. "It's totally unfair to Jimi," he says. "It's unfair to everybody who was around at the time. I just think it's really unfair to the fans, to anyone who ever loved Jimi Hendrix. Yes, he died a tragic death, and he died much too young. But spreading these lies that he was murdered, it's utter crap, and I've been silent about this for much too long." Now, after more than 50 years, the mystery behind the death of Jimi Hendrix may at last have been broken. In an exposé titled "Who Killed the Guitar God?", first published in boomermagazine.com in 2020, Karl Ferris, Jimi Hendrix's original album photographer and art designer, along with David Comfort, author of the best-selling Rock and Roll Book of the Dead, teamed up to solve the mystery, using new revelations from inside sources. According to the authors, the London coroner reported the cause of death as inhalation of vomit following barbiturate intoxication. Scotland Yard opened a brief inquiry in 1992, but due to inconclusive evidence, soon announced the case was no longer in the public interest to reopen the original inquest. But today, new evidence has come to light, proving that Jimi Hendrix was murdered. But by whom? Just before his demise, the guitarist was about to fire his manager, Mike Jeffrey, who had launched his career 4 years prior. Jeffrey, the manager of the Animals and other groups, had close mafia connections and boasted of having once been a British intelligence agent responsible for Cold War assassinations. Though Hendrix and his group, The Experience, had earned more than $50 million from 3 albums and relentless touring, they found themselves all but penniless after discovering that their high-living manager, the ex-spy, kept the money in numbered bank accounts in the Bahamas. In the spring of 1969, an exhausted Hendrix disbanded The Experience. In an attempt to bring him back to heel, a deeply in-debt Jeffrey engineered a drug plant and bust in Toronto, then, months later, had Jimi kidnapped at gunpoint. The intimidation didn't work. Refusing to resurrect the cash cow Experience, Jimi launched his all-black band of Gypsys, which Jeffrey then sabotaged and destroyed after only a few performances. Following a brief drug-addled German tour in September 1970, Jimi fled to London, telling a confidant he felt surrounded by wolves. Who were these wolves? Paternity suit lawyers, breach of contract lawyers, New York mafia loan collectors, ex-girlfriends, and Jeffrey himself, whose management contract was about to expire. Hiding from them all, Jimi convinced Miles Davis's manager, Alan Douglas, to represent him and support his new jazz-influenced musical direction. For Jeffrey, losing Jimi would mean disaster, prosecution for his embezzlement and mismanagement, plus bankruptcy, if not imprisonment. The ex-spy used electronic eavesdropping devices and informants to keep track of his artists. Especially Jimi, who said, "If I'm free, it's because I'm always running." In the end, he was running with a mysterious blonde, Monica Danneman. He'd only known her for days, and his friends called her a stalker. But, despite his paranoia, he didn't seem to suspect his girlfriend de jour might be his manager's informant. Jeffrey reportedly died in 1973. In 2009, Tappy Wright, an Animals roadie, published his autobiography Rock Roadie, claiming that his boss, Jeffrey, had confessed the murder to him in 1971. Now, she was intimating murder and possible mafia involvement. Days before she was to do a tell-all for a London radio station, she was found mysteriously asphyxiated in her car. As a result of Hendrix's death by what authorities called misadventure, Jeffrey's management contract was renewed by default. He collected on a £1 million life insurance policy, and he took over the Hendrix estate, which generated millions annually. In a final truth-stranger-than-fiction development, in 1973, the ex-spy days before he was scheduled to return to London to face huge lawsuits relating to his embezzlement, money laundering, and fraud, was reportedly killed in a suspicious airline collision explosion over France. The unrecognizable headless body of the supposed Jeffrey was identified by his recovered jewelry. No DNA or dental chart cross-checks were done. And, although the 10-mile radius debris pattern showed all the signs of an onboard bomb explosion, the French authorities still refused to release the aircraft black boxes to independent investigators. Eric Burdon of the Animals, and many other former Jeffrey clients wonder if their former manager, the ex-spy and munitions expert, might have deliberately arranged his death, missed that flight as he often did, and could be still alive and relaxing on his own island somewhere, living secretly and royally on Hendrix's money, long ago hidden away in Bahama numbered accounts. And so the guitar god was gone, but his immortal voodoo child refrain lives on. If I don't meet you no more in this world, I'll meet in the next, and don't be late. That concludes this installment of the series. Stay tuned for future episodes where we will continue to explore the impact of Jimi's untimely death, along with the influence and legacy that continues to reverberate to this day. In addition, keep an eye out for updates to earlier episodes as we add new details and images to the Hendrix story, not to mention new music-related stories. So don't forget to subscribe for future content updates. And by the way, if you have any photos, stories, ideas, or feedback to contribute, we would love to hear from you. Until next time,